I'm Layman Pascal, and this is an integral stage series interviewing podcasters, YouTubers, and others who want to or can't help but try to provide higher, deeper, and more transformational content through online media. Who are the people doing this? What do they collectively understand and point towards? How can they be amplified, clarified, maybe even unified? That's our project, and helping me crawl through it today is a developmental thinker I've wanted to get to know a little better for some time now, David Hartful Jr., who I'm told is in the process of bringing some new lectures on the caste system to his YouTube channel, Black Leadership Analysis. Have I got that right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So what are these lectures? What are you working on?
Oh, well, so my site, the whole site is really about developing a new ego development system based around social justice struggles. And so the reason I chose Black Leadership Analysis is because I felt Black is a more encompassing term. And so one of the things I'm doing on my site is, well, I do talk about race. It was originally named Spiral Dynamics and Race. But I changed the name because Don Beck actually contacted me. And he was going to sue me at first. So I actually changed the name. And me and him got to talking after a while. He understood what I was trying to do. So I want to get more Black people involved in ego development theories. And at the time, the only one I knew was spiral dynamics. And so I'm looking at different Black leaders and putting them in the framework of spiral dynamics. And at first I was just doing like YouTubers and things like that, like just for fun. But once I realized people like Don Beck were reading me, I was like, I need to do more insightful people. So I kept growing and growing, and now it's growing into more of a ego development system made for social justice struggle. And so with that, one of the thinkers I'm doing in the system is Ambedkar, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar from India. He was one of the biggest advocates for the untouchables, better known now as Dalits in India. And within Indian society, he was one of the first Dalits ever to study overseas. He studied at Columbia in America and also Gray's Inn. And he developed various systems around social justice in India. And he was one of the chief architects of the Indian Constitution, which they use now. And so in India, he advocated for untouchables, better known as Dalits. And he actually got what's called a reservation system for the Dalits. So in the reservation system, they actually had a separate electorate and reserved seats in the parliament. Well, Gandhi was against that, and him and Gandhi debated the issue, and Gandhi went on a fast to stop the communal award from going through. And once that was done, they had to do the Pune Pact, which was a compromise, which gave reserved seats in the parliament to Dalits, but it'd be in a general electorate. Well, all of that actually culminated at the end of Ambedkar's life, and Ambedkar converting almost 500,000 Dalits into Buddhism. And so I love Ambedkar's story because it shows how someone grows from a political leader to a religious leader and how that development happens. And so I'm doing a lecture series going through his entire struggle and how he grew and how his methods grew and how his philosophy grew along with it.
Nice. What would you say, like, what's at the heart of the intersection between social justice and ego development?
Well, you have to understand different people fighting for social justice are fighting at different levels. So you shouldn't vilify anybody from having a different method than you, but you should understand where they fit in the journey. And once you understand that, you can understand how you can work together with them to a similar goal. Okay? So you might see a guy online calling everybody who's a Trump supporter an idiot, or cursing them out as soon as they say they're a Trump supporter. Well, that guy's operating from a red meme mentality. Now, him cursing people out on Facebook isn't going to fix anything. However, understanding you have a guy who's not afraid to upset people to get a point across, that is helpful. And so once you understand that, you can integrate him into your struggle, into your movement, and have him move in a useful manner. You know, And another thing is people who are trying to placate the quote unquote enemy, because early in social justice movements, there's a well-defined enemy. Now, after a while, you'll grow and understand how everything interconnects and you don't have an enemy anymore, but you still understand that there's things in the world that are not optimal that you need to fix. But, you know, you'll see somebody being overly placating to the oppressor, quote unquote oppressor. Well, those people can be used to try to build bridges. So you understand how to integrate those people into your movement too. And I think that's one of the great things about social justice, and also understanding the history of the Black movement, the Black liberation movement in America is going to be really insightful for everybody of all different cultures, because there's definitely a progression in the Black liberation movement here in America. Whereas during Reconstruction and after Reconstruction, most of the leaders concentrated on the fact that Black people are Americans. And as Americans, we deserve the same citizenship rights as everybody else. And so that really took Black leadership or Black liberation from Reconstruction Civil War on up to about almost Dr. King. And so that movement moved and progressed and grew along the way. And so when King came in, what he did differently was he said that the people before him were deeply working within the system they had. So a guy like Thurgood Marshall, he joined the NAACP. And what he did, he worked and got court cases for different discrimination issues, and that all culminated into Brown v. Board. There's 20 years of cases before Brown v. Board that Thurgood Marshall won on the local level. So when King came, King introduced civil disobedience. Now, civil disobedience wasn't something that was completely foreign in Black liberation. The Silent March in, I want to say, the 1930s was one of the first demonstrations against lynching. And a whole bunch of Black people marched in Washington in silence to protest lynchings. But what King did was he said that it's okay to break the law when the law is unjust. And if you get sent to jail, be okay with being sent to jail. And that's kind of revolutionary in and of itself. Because if someone can intimidate you with the fear of going to prison, you're going to be very, very limited in what you can do. So King opened up the orange meme. Not that he was the first orange meme leader, but he was one of the first orange meme leaders. Now, when King's coming on, you also have the whole Black is Beautiful movement, the identity movements of people like Malcolm X and everything like that. And they even took it further, saying that, look, I'm an African, not an American, and I'm chiefly an African. And as an African, you should respect me as that. And people like Stokely Carmichael came in with Black Power and everything. So his assertion with Black Power was that, yes, I am different. I'm not just like you. And even with me being different, you still have to respect me. You should respect me because I'm different. Because the thing about Black is Beautiful was, like, before he came with Black is Beautiful, that was something that, I mean, most people didn't want to be called Black because it was something that separates. It's something that was seen as not beautiful. So when he did...
Do you see this, the distinction between orange and green as really centered around this idea of, you know, on the one hand, affirming that we're all the same and should be treated the same, and at the next level, affirming that we're all different and should be
still,
yeah, and
we still should be treated equally. You know, and that's the whole Black Power African Pan-Africanist movement. You know, so you see all these different movements, and there's a definite progression along the way, and it's something that I'm still developing, and that's why I have the Facebook group Black Leadership Analysis, so people can come together and discuss these different trends within social justice and essentially Black liberation too.
Yeah, I don't know if you know Greg Thomas. I had a discussion with him a couple of months ago. He has I think it was on improvisation and spirituality, but he's got a project called the Jazz Leadership Project.
Yes.
And What do you think? Is there a particular relevance to the concept of leadership for higher level Black thinkers?
Yeah, I think there's because I think there's a piece of it where we have to understand how we are unique and different, and also how we fit. So if you lose either of those things, you'll go off the rails. So if you just see yourself as one of the group, then you'll just say, okay, I don't want to really involve myself in anything that's different or edgy. So I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to play it safe and not offend anybody. Now, if you do that, you're never going to cause the type of agitation that brings change. You know, even nonviolent movements, that agitation was a serious thing to do. You know, just sitting at a lunch counter in the 60s was extremely dangerous. Now, if you get too far on the I'm different piece of it, then you kind of break off into separatist movements that won't really go anywhere and have this small cult following around them. And when you have these small cult followings, a lot of times they end up based off of personality, and that kind of starts going off the rails too.
So you think it takes a certain degree of integration of the principle of leadership to be able to be involved in change?
Yes, exactly. And you see, understand how different people need to be led differently. You know, so some people just need a loud, angry, boisterous person. And some people need somebody who's more thoughtful, that writes out long essays to read, that have really thought through everything too. So it's understanding. One of the things I want to do with Black leadership analysis, if you read the whole site, after a while, you'll realize there's a certain type of leader you feel like is the best. And that'll be like, no matter what culture you're in. And then from that, you can tell where your center of gravity is yourself. Instead of taking a test and having someone tell you it, you can evaluate it for yourself. You'll eventually say that these orange meme leaders seem like the guys who are on top of it. You know, if you're more of a business type thinker and the type of person who thinks that economic empowerment is the most important, you'll start gravitating to Black leaders that are based around businesses and how to start businesses. And then you'll come to the conclusion that you're orange meme instead of someone telling you it. And I think that in of itself is powerful.
I love this idea of using the developmental models as a way of including a greater range of types of people in change movements, right? Sometimes I think of, you know, in a very cartoonish way, I think of like Caesar or somebody like that, a person who's really mobilizing on a historical stage. And I figure that guy thinks of everyone as being on his side. He's just got to figure out how. Yeah. So when we look at these different stages, we can say, okay, this is how you're on our side and this is how you're on our side. But in addition to all of that inclusivity, what's the role of exclusivity? Who do we say is not involved? You know, when is somebody more problem than they're worth?
Okay, that's where the psychology comes in. So you have to be able to evaluate different people's psychology to understand, are they simply just a toxic person, or are they trying to agitate to bring about some type of change? So there are going to be people who just like cursing people out online. But you have to be able to understand the psychology of the person to know, okay, this is a person I should get away from. This is a person I should be more interested in. Like one of the people I did on my site was a guy named Brother Polite, and he's a YouTuber. And he talks about a lot of Black issues and everything. But he's also involved with a lot of alleged scams, okay? So the more research I did on him, I found all these alleged scams he was doing, to where one of them was like, if you were losing your house, you could pay him a certain amount of money, and he would send you all the information, legal information you knew to save your house. Well, he's not a lawyer. He's never been trained in law. And by sending you the information for you to represent yourself, he absolves himself from any legal responsibility. So he takes all your money, he sends you all this stuff that may or may not even be applicable in your state, and then you go up and try to argue your case and you end up losing your house anyway. So once you see that kind of pattern developing in a leader, that's the type of leader you want to stay away from, because that guy's just trying to hustle you, if all that's true. I don't want to get nobody in trouble on your podcast, so, you know, if it's all true. So that's the kind of thing you gotta watch out for, because there's a lot of hustlers out here that understand how to play off your pain. You know, they know what you've gone through, and they know how to hit those buttons inside of you to make you join up with some people and don't have your best interest at heart.
Seems like that's a problem at the higher levels of the political system as well, because one of the easiest things in the world to do is essentially a fake developmental approach, where you just do a marketing shout out to all different value sets, and then you can claim that you're the inclusive candidate, and really that's just at the verbal level.
Exactly, or different identities. You know, a lot of people do it at different identities and just say, oh, well, this guy looks like me, so he must be on my side, and that's not how it works either. So that's another great thing about knowing ego development psychology. You'll be able to pick that out quicker than somebody who hasn't studied all this.
This is, I don't know, the fourth or fifth in this series of interviews. And everybody I've talked to has ended up having some kind of discussion about progressive politics in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, is this coincidence? Is it just the moment we're in? Or do you think there's something about the kind of people who are internet people that makes them uniquely available to, you know, the kind of critical analysis of the need for systemic upgrade and inclusion?
Well, I think for integralists, I think anybody who's interested in this is just interested in the more root causes of problems, more so than other people. So it just naturally plays out into politics, because that's the largest arena there is. You know, we'll do this on our personal lives and dating and all that too, but we'll definitely do it when involving politics. Now, one thing about my page is I went out specifically to get Black Trump supporters, because I'm a Bernie guy. I consider myself a socialist and a Marxist and extreme left. So I wanted to make sure my Facebook group was balanced. So I tried really hard to get Black Trump supporters in there. But I found that many of them didn't really want to be bothered with the site or weren't very interested in it. It might be the way I'm marketing it, but I definitely want there to be an integralist right. I want there to be an integralist right more than anything, because I feel like with both parts of the political spectrum, if they're both operating from an honest and developmental point of view, they'll be able to synthesize together to get solutions that can actually fit with the world. You know, I try to understand both sides of the spectrum and everything. So, I mean, I think it's really important to have an integralist right. Now, I don't know what an integralist right would look like, because I'm not a right winger. But I want to bring in as many people as I can to kind of flesh that out.
Yeah, I think that's a really open question. And a lot of people I talk to are trying to think out, where does the higher center come from? Because we're looking at a right and left of an existing center, and they seem to keep the ball trapped between them.
Yeah.
So we're stuck with the system we have. Now, there's kind of two approaches to integral politics, right? Mm-hmm. And one is to think, how can we achieve some kind of balance and embrace of all the different levels that we're dealing with? And the other one is to say, look, the one we need to really emphasize is the one just before us, because you only get as much integral as you've got green.
Yeah.
So how do we double down on the progressive, at the same time maintain a fairness to all the parts? And then that's true of the left and the right. So if we're looking for the integral right, is it the conservative version of balancing all the V-memes, or are we looking for the right-wing progressives who are moving to the next level?
The new Teddy Roosevelts is what you're looking for. The new Teddy Roosevelts. See, that's the thing. I don't see any Teddy Roosevelts anymore. I mean, I don't see any FDRs anymore. So, I mean, that's one of the things I posted. I was like, I don't see a lot of real, for what we're about to be up against. Like, we're about to be up against a lot here. Once this shutdown is over and COVID is over, you're going to have, like, some reports say 30% of the population unemployed. Like, you can't just have 30% of the population unemployed. And you need some serious leadership and some serious innovation to get us through that. And I really don't see anybody on either side coming up with anything really novel or new.
It's very interesting to see how few actual political actors are on the stage at the moment. I was just watching this Bernie Blackout documentary. I don't know if you've seen it, but kind of goes over the movement from the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very aware that there's a huge population out there. There's a great constituency for this that was already mobilized. And the conditions now in the United States are just going to add pressure and build that populist mobilization. It's like there's an army there without a leader. And you'd think that somebody would want to be that leader. They're available to lift somebody to the White House. But who wants to take it? I don't see anybody coming forward.
Well, I mean, I hope it's going to be Nina Turner. That's what I'm hoping for. I think Nina Turner is the best of all of them. But if you ever hear her speak, she's amazing. And I feel like she is as integral as the leftist is going to get for the moment. You know, I like her a lot. But you're right. Even on the local level, I see very few people that are really ready to meet this moment with some new ideas. And I'm scared of how bad it's going to get before something happens. That's one of the things I want to do on my site. I want to go back over all these great leaders so you at least have a base to understand what's going on. Because I did one of the first integral analysis of Dr. King. I went through all his books, and I have it in my on my site, and a lot of other articles I found along the way about him. And I kind of determined he was green mean in his politics. Now he could have been integral in his religious beliefs, because I talked to a buddy of mine about the sermon he gave right before he died at the Masons Temple. And he talks about, and King in that speech talks about how he went through all these different stages in human history, from Plato to Thoreau till now. And I was talking to a buddy of mine with it, and my buddy, he's talking about an astral projection. And I was like, whoa, is King really talking about astral projection here? And after he said that and I reread it, I was like, I think he is talking about astral projection, but I didn't put that in the blog post because I can't definitively prove that. But I think that King was one of these guys. I consider Dr. King a prophet, along with Malcolm X. And I really feel like somebody on his level could really put together the politics and the mysticism that could really bring us out of something. But I don't really see anybody else even close to that, or even understanding that's where they need to go. Like, I don't even see that far where they understand that's where they're supposed to be going. I mean, how awesome would it be to have a social justice movement where all the leaders were also meditators, and they were also studying ego development theory, and they still knew the nuts and bolts of how to organize a protest, and they knew the nuts and bolts of how to get on a ballot and how to get a ballot initiative on. Think about how powerful that could be. And I think in the integralist movement, we can start to build that. Extinction Rebellion is based off integral principles, and they're one of the most powerful leftist organizations we got right now. But
let's change angles a little bit, because I'd like to talk a bit about the role of racial identity.
Yeah. Because
I know there's a lot of people in higher and developmental circles who are kind of conflicted on this, and that part of them feels like large identity groups are something that we're supposed to transcend and grow beyond. And then a lot of other people feel like it's part of our historical uniqueness and political relevance and the inheritance of ancestral energies and things like that we're going to carry with us up through every stage of our development. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, that's already been done by a guy named Dr. William Cross and Dr. Thomas Parham. I got an analysis of both those guys on my site right now. They did something called ethnic identity development. And so in ethnic identity development, a person starts off in what they call pre-encounter. And so the pre-encounter stage is when a person just is earlier in their life and they don't understand race yet. So they just see themselves as just another kid. And so as their life progresses, and so while they're in pre-encounter, they're more susceptible to society's understanding of what blackness is. So they'll have a lot of times a negative understanding of being black because they haven't encountered what race is. Then there's an encounter part of their development, when something happens to them that forces them to grapple with the idea of race. And so once someone is called the N-word, or they're denied a job, or they end up wanting to date somebody but their parents won't let them date them, they're then conflicted with this idea of race, and they have to make sense of it. So once that happens, what happens after that is the immersion stage. I am immersion, and then immersion. So the I am part of it is immersing yourself in Black culture. So they'll come into Black culture and they'll join Black identity groups, and they'll be very deeply into their identity for a long time. And that will spark dislike for other identities. That'll be a stage for a certain amount of time. Then they'll go to immersion, EM, and that's when they come out of that, and they can be, again, become part of society, but they understand where their roots are and who they are, and they understand how to deal with race. Now, after that, you have internalization. And within internalization, Dr. Cross made a model with 3 types of internalization. One is monocultural, where someone sees themselves as African, but they don't have any animosity to anybody else, but they see themselves as totally African and have no interest in any other cultures. Then there's the biculturalist, who sees themselves as African American. They understand themselves as both being African and being separate, but they're also part of America. And then the third point is multiculturalist, where they can see themselves having various different identities. They can see themselves as Black, a Buddhist, a socialist, an integralist, and they're okay with all those identities together. Now, you have to understand, in that internalization stage, there's 3 different types of people still. And so some people will go through their ego development and their identity development, and just to say, I want to separate. And it's not something angrily where they're separating. That's what they want to do. And then other people want to integrate and build a multicultural coalition. And you have to let people grow in their development. And so ethnic identity development is so important for people to understand, because ethnic identity development started by Dr. Cross, was then taken, and there is such thing as white identity development that was done by another theorist. And then there's one for Asians and Hispanic people too. And it talks about how they grow in their identity. And so once you understand that identity development, the Black people you feel like are more confrontational, you'll understand them as more than likely being in immersion at the moment. And so once you have that perspective, you don't take all that stuff personally. You understand that's where they are in their development. Now, they could be a monoculturalist too, because it's hard for you to differentiate from the outside. But just once you understand that growth and development, you can say, okay, people can have their identity and they will grow in the way they see fit. And you have to allow people to grow in the way they see fit, and the people that want to join your movement can. But it's also important to understand your own ethnic identity development, so you can understand where your blind spots are and when the person needs to be listened to, and that the group should modify for the person sometimes. That's another thing integralists have to balance. Sometimes the person needs to modify for the group, and other times the group needs to modify for the person. Dr. Parham had a whole essay on this, talking about company cultures. And so he was talking about how a lot of Black people will join these companies and be top-notch performers, but the culture of the company won't let them express themselves as they want. So he looks at it for the company to evaluate when they could bend to help the person out too. And these are the kind of things as integralists we could hold in balance where other people can't.
You made me think about the possibility of a few people within group context sort of hijacking it. Like, I guess I'm thinking of that last Spike Lee movie. It had a very interesting look at sort of the Black Klansman film, if you saw it.
Yeah.
There was a group of arguably white people who've had this collision. Now they're thinking of themselves as white people. They're somewhat monoculturalist, and maybe they're just at that stage. But within that group, there's a couple of people who are toxic.
Yeah.
And they can hijack the entire group, especially if it's a monoculturalist group. So that seems like a regular danger. we face.
Yeah, and exactly. And if average people don't know about ego development, it's going to be even harder to stop it. That's why I think there needs to be a serious push in interrelist circles to make content that's digestible by people who aren't steeped in psychology. And that's one of the things I try to do on my site is make it very easily understandable for everybody. And so I think that's something we need to do. We need to get as much of this information to regular people as possible in simple terms so they can understand when this is about to happen, so they can stop it from happening. I think that's a lot of what's happening with Brother Polite, like I said before. You know, he's a very boisterous person. He's a very charismatic person. And he can get all these people to join up with him because he knows what to say to make them feel comfortable and make them feel empowered. And then he takes advantage of them.
Do you think there's, I mean, a lot of people look around developmental circles and they go, woe is me. Why is it mostly white guys?
Yeah.
And white guys within a certain age range as well.
Yeah.
Are these other groups out there from your perspective, right? Are there a bunch of like different kinds of black folks who have the intuitive insight and the personal experience and development, and they just haven't heard the languaging, or they're just not connected to these other philosophical movements? Or is it something new to them?
Well,
I think around and we say, where are they? Are they not there, or are they just somewhere else and we have to link up with them?
Well, the Black Studies movement is very deep in developmental psychology. So the Black Studies movement is a great jumping off point for integralists if they want to do outreach. And so so ethnic identity development is also called nigrescence. And nigrescence comes from the French word black and emergence, or essence, black and essence. So there's a lot of Black studies that have been based around nigrescence. And there's also debate within Black studies on is ethnic identity development a good model, because a lot of the monoculturalists believe that it shouldn't have anything to do with American culture at all. Like, it should be completely separated. A Black person can't be psychologically healthy unless he sees himself as only an African. So like, that's another thing that's going on within Black studies groups. But one thing about Black studies groups is because they had to form to fight this idea of Black inferiority that was steeped in psychology and steeped in history and steeped in sociology and philosophy, they understand things from a developmental perspective fundamentally, because they had to fight against a lot of these old developmental models that said that Black people are just naturally more susceptible to disease, which isn't true, or that Black people are less intelligent, which isn't true. And that's another thing. They assimilated
a lot of those structures by virtue of the fact that they had to combat them.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're familiar with it. So if you can present them an ego development theory that was absolved of all that, that could be a real powerful thing. So one of the things that made me leave a lot of these integralist groups was that they kept talking about Jordan Peterson all the time. And Jordan Peterson talks about how Black people have lower IQ, and that's partially caused by DNA. That's not true. So the IQ test, when it was originally made, was made by people who were eugenicists, and they were trying to justify eugenics and all that type of stuff. So I'm working on that also now. And a good guy to read on this is Ibrahim Kendi. He wrote a piece on IQ tests are racist, and he talks about how the original test, the guy who did it took 30 years before he could develop a test that actually had Black people scoring lower on it consistently. Another thing you got to know about is Adrian Bond. He's Julian Bond's father, the civil rights leader. And so in America, before World War I, they didn't want Black people fighting in the military because they say we weren't courageous. Well, once they ran out of soldiers, they started having to have Black people fight. And Black people actually did some of the most valorous acts in World War I. Well, that means that those guys had to get promoted. And they were scared that one of them would get promoted so high, he would be in charge of white units as well as Black units. And so that's why they made the first IQ test in the military. And so the test they went through, the Black people did score lower. But Adrian Bond came in and explained how the Black people that were tested mostly came from the South. So the South didn't have good education back then anyway. And Black Southerners scored the same as white Southerners. So there was no IQ deficiency. And this test was just put in to keep black people from getting higher rank in the military. And so when people start talking about IQ, they need to understand what they're supporting. When they start talking about black people have lower IQ and it's based off race, they know what they're supporting. They're supporting eugenicists. And I think that we need to understand that and move forward from that and move forward away from Jordan Peterson and all. Because that's why I couldn't really.
Do you have an impression about what it takes to make those kind of tests more fair? Because, you know, from the developmental point of view, if we've got all these different intelligences, these different kinds of talents and styles of growth, we do need better ways of evaluating what's going on inside everybody's nervous system in these different ways. So how do we do that better?
Well, I mean, I think it's
some
just
of these structural biases or even inherent tweaks that people added on purpose.
Well, I mean, IQ, I don't see where IQ is helping anything. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, college entrance testing is different. There's a certain set of skills one needs to go to college with. So those tests are a little bit different, but understand that if you're testing people, even if black people are scoring lower, you can't factor out socioeconomic status. You can't factor out historical education differences. So if your parents weren't able to go to good schools and you don't know how to do something, well, you can't ask your parents. And then your parents were discriminated against, so they don't have a lot of money. So they can't hire you a tutor either. So, I mean, I don't see a problem with college entrance testing as long as we keep it at these people just didn't have the skill set to move and don't try to extrapolate that there's something just wrong with black people. So, I mean, college entrance exam is different. But, I mean, we still could look at that to make it more culturally fair. Like in the reading section, they could have black history parts in the reading section, you know, but a lot of the things that they put in the reading section is stuff that wealthier white people would know. Like they would have something in there about boating or something. Well, no one black boats. So when you come in to read that article, you know more than a black person. So that's also adding to the difference in test scores. So, but there's already a big movement for that in SATs. And that's, again, something that's going on in the Black Studies department. But IQ test in and of itself, I don't even see the point of it. All it is just something so you can say that you have a number to say you're smarter than somebody else. I mean, they've already done studies on IQ. And a lot of times it doesn't mean that you're more successful or make more money or anything like that. So IQ test is just something you do for fun just to say you're smarter than people. So I don't really even see the point in IQ.
It's very interesting to me to think about this relationship between socioeconomic status and race, because very often, like you were saying about people taking the test, we point to race and we're actually pointing to the results of a socioeconomic disparity.
And historical disparity.
So to what degree should we be cautious about focusing on race in certain areas when the issue might really be socioeconomic disparity?
Well,
like,
I mean,
if one politician comes forward and says, boy, I'm all for black people, and the other one comes forward and says, I'm going to make these socioeconomic changes that will end up being of significant benefit to populations that have been disproportionately disadvantaged, how do we negotiate that?
I'm not really sure. I mean, the thing of it is you just have to understand, usually when people point to race, they're pointing to it as a proxy for something else. So I was watching this one theorist, I can't think of her name right now, but she was saying that it's typically thought of black people have higher blood pressure or have more likely to have blood pressure problems. Well, once she did the study, the worst blood pressure diagnosis, the highest percentage of high blood pressure people were in Finland. And she's like, well, why isn't it in Finland? Well, Finnish food is salted fish. That's their main cultural food. So if your main cultural food is salted fish, then of course you're going to have high blood pressure because you eat salted fish all day. And so poor communities eat more salt because canned food is cheaper than fresh food. So if you're eating a lot of canned foods and canned meats, then you're going to have higher blood pressure than someone who's actually eating healthy. Now, unless you change the social economics, you're not going to be set up in a situation where you can stop buying canned foods. So these are things we got to think about along with it too. And this idea, like guys like Jordan Peterson are advancing, that there's just something wrong with Black people, that's actually hurting us in outreach, because people are coming into the situation just thinking, well, there's not a lot of Black people that can understand this. And that's another problem. And so that's why I'm careful to make my site separate from Integralist. Like it's its own thing. Black leadership analysis is its own thing. And that's because a lot of the stuff I saw on a lot of Facebook groups, and also Don Beck's PhD thesis on the Civil War. Have you read that yet?
I haven't seen it, no.
Yeah, so I read it, and then the thesis is about they should have compromised on slavery to avoid the Civil War. And so I read his thesis, and I summarized it in a video, and I also critiqued it in a video. And so somebody come in, and in the thesis, he actually said that Black people shouldn't be consulted on race issues because they can't look at it objectively. Well, who is he to say that a Black person couldn't look at a racial issue objectively? And why would a white person be able to do that? So that was written in 1964, but it's something that we need to go back and revisit and extricate and understand that a lot of the basis of what we did wasn't right. And we need to redo a lot of this basis on race and understand how race fits into it. And it doesn't have to be something that separates people. It can be something that brings people in and brings people together too.
Do you think a lot of developmental, philosophical, and spiritual contexts are sort of contaminated by an overly moderate sensibility? People see these different categories of people in these different stages, and their tendency is to try to make a compromised balance, possibly at the exclusion of doubling down on the moral courage of the leading edge that we need to defend.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. But I think that's still better than exclusion. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how to thread that needle. But I think if you really want to build a truly inclusive group that can better the society, you need to make sure it's multicultural, you know?
Who's, in terms of what you're doing, the projects you're working on, who's doing something like you that you really admire? Is there anybody, like, either in terms of their aesthetic and production or in terms of their content? Who do you think is doing a good job?
Yeah. Iramiose Frimpong. He's called the Funky Academic, and he is a philosophy professor, I want to say in University of Georgia. And he does a lot of philosophical lectures that relate to local Athens politics. And I think that's huge to relate it back to local politics too. So Iramiose Frimpong is really the guy who inspired me to start. And Don Beck. I mean, I criticize Don Beck, but I still have a great deep admiration for him because he did so much. So, you know, I mean, it's something, that's another thing you have to hold in balance. You can critique somebody, but still have a deep admiration for him too. But Iramiose Frimpong is the guy to me. He's one of the best out here.
Yeah, I've seen Funky Academic, I think interviewed with Crystal Sagar on Rising a few times.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's really good. And he does some pretty deep philosophical work too.
What's your sense of the relevance of internet media? Because it seems like there's a lot of really interesting ideas being exchanged on the internet, but to some degree, it still hasn't cracked the mainstream, which is consistently dominated by cable news narratives. How do we foreground internet communication in a way that's more politically relevant?
I think it's just going to take time. I think that what we got to do is just keep sharing online, building Facebook groups, and just keep working it like that. I think it's just going to take time. Another thing about mainstream cable news, their demographic, I want to say, is like 55 and older. Their average person is like 55 or 60. So I think just as time progresses, you're going to have even the 50-year-olds where they are looking mostly at YouTube and internet news and internet learning. And another thing about YouTube is a lot of people are going there for just general research too. So the more information you put out, it might not go viral, but the people that really need to see it are going to see it.
What's your sense of masculine and feminine styles in the development of negrescence?
Well, see, I've only done 2 theorists right now. I've done Dr. William Cross and then Dr. Parham. There's one female, or one woman that does it, and it's Beverly Van Diver. And I haven't got her books yet. So I got to see how different that is. But there's a lot of, in Black studies, a lot of relationship information in it too, about how to deal with different genders and all. And a lot of Black studies theorists are also feminist. So like Abraham Kendi, for example, is also a feminist. So he has a lot of good work on that. That's not really what I do, though. I don't, I kind of just try to look at everything from a base. I have been criticized because I haven't evaluated a lot of women leaders. And I want to do more, but I also want to make sure I do the people that come naturally to me also. I don't want to go out and just do 3 women, pick 3 women out because I did 3 men. So I want to grow it that way too. So I'm looking at a couple more women I can analyze, but I really want to get the big names into the civil rights movement right now.
That balance between doing it the way you're interested versus trying to do it kind of arbitrarily in order to have inclusion, that's a tricky balance, because I'm in a lot of discussion groups, and, or on an editorial board or in a project, and there's always somebody who's like, hey, we need more women and Black people or something like that, right? And it's internally, it's agonizing, because you go, yes, we do, but we don't want to go at it that way.
Exactly. But you got to make content that's relevant then. That's the thing. You have to make content that's relevant to them. Now, with my group, Black Leadership Analysis, it's open to everybody. It's not just Black people, but it focuses on issues going on with Black people. And I like to throw in a lot of alternative media in there too. So I think it's really important to do people I feel like Black people are going to be interested in, and use that to grow ego development theory, understanding ego development theory. I think that's really important. But it's going to be hard for a group that's not inclusive to become inclusive. And so, I mean, you might just have to recruit Black people to a stage, and then the ball will start rolling. And that's what I tried to do with the Trump supporters. I wanted to make sure my group was balanced, so I reached out to Black Trump supporters to get them to join. But, I mean, it didn't work out for me, but I'm not able, and I think it'll work out for other people.
How do you connect with those people? What do you admire most about Trump, so to speak?
Well, I mean, he knows how to work a media. Like, if you just take the morality out of it, he knows how to work the media. But I mean, that doesn't mean he's not a racist. I mean, the guy got on because he was promoting birtherism. People lose sight of that. And then also in all of his rallies, people were screaming out racial slurs, and he didn't stop anybody. So the guy is definitely a racist, but I mean, he does know how to work a political landscape, get media attention. And the media is so easily manipulated with them too. That's one thing I hate about the media, where they just blow up over tweets and everything like that. Because all it does is, instead of moving it towards a policy discussion, it moves it towards a respectability discussion. And everybody on every level of development is not worried about respectability. A lot of these guys, working class people, they like him being uncouth and saying what he thinks. So, I mean, that's what how we say.
There's something I've talked to a number of people on this series about, which is the kind of internet aesthetic, which is a little bit less professional, rougher, more multidimensional. And I think that goes very nicely with that working class ethic of not being too polished and wanting to hear somebody say things that are surprising, upsetting, crude, that kind of stuff. And I wonder how more sensitive, more progressive people can get in on that, because you're right, Trump did an amazing job hacking the incentive structure of the mainstream media, right? Because they didn't want him, but they do want somebody doing things that will keep eyeballs glued to screens. How do progressives hack the incentive structure of the mainstream media? How do we do stunts? How do we be upsetting enough that they want to cover us for free?
Well, see, that's where you need those red mean people at. You got to figure out how to harness those red mean people and have them do that. Because I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to think of a stunt that would get me on TV. And even the stuff I would think of as a stunt would involve like deep research and stuff like that. So it wouldn't be, and that's why you need a multicultural and multi-egocentric group of people. You can't just have professors and armchair intellectuals in a group and that just be enough. So, I mean, I don't really know how to do it in that kind of fashion. I mean, I love Extinction Rebellion, how they glued themselves to the wall in the Capitol building and wouldn't move, that type of a demonstration. But I don't know exactly how to do that, how to harness that. I think it's that's why I say you need different people at different stages of ego development working together.
How do we, do you think much about the procedures of collective decision making? Because I see this, there's a definite fragility and a narrow problematic groupthink that comes from having all one type of person, whether it's one type of cultural person or one type of developmental level involved. So you got to have these different constituencies represented in the decision making group. Just like, having workers on the board makes a difference.
Yeah, it does.
However, you could have a dumb mob event of diverse people as well. So how do we, like one system we have is representational majoritarian voting. One system we have is authoritarian control. Like, do you think much about the systems by which even a diverse group of people can function really well and use all their intelligence together, or maybe fail and just become a useless mob, even though they're very diverse?
Well, in the civil rights movement, one thing people discount is the amount of education that these people had. They had freedom schools in Mississippi to where they had volunteer teachers teaching farmers about how civics works, how government works, and political philosophy. So I think we need to go back to that, having a modern day freedom school where we teach ego development, plus we teach, it's just not just airy-fairy philosophical stuff. Like I said before, hard-nosed civics, how to get a ballot initiative started, how to organize a protest safely, and have it as a modern-day integralist freedom school. And it needs to be something that, everybody can access, hopefully on the internet or in person. So I think the education piece is going to be very, very important. Another Highlander Folk School was another school that these civil rights protesters went to learn how to organize. And I think that education is going to be very important. And also, I think the understanding of ego development is going to be helpful, because if someone can understand themselves as the red mean, then they'll naturally defer to people with other ego development styles for some guidance.
How well behaved should people be if they really want to make change, right? Is there a danger of pulling back because the feedback told you it was going to be problematic to go at it that way, and that's the mechanism of suppression?
Exactly.
Well, you're being too disturbing, you're being too dangerous, you're not nice enough. Should you lean into that shadow that's emerging culturally, or should you try to, put on a more professional front and avoid those shots?
Well, see, that's the same thing they were telling the King, because King was getting people arrested, So, I mean, there isn't a hard, fast rule, I don't think. I think this is just the part that we have to feel out. And I think that's where being a meditator comes in, being able to sit and see things for what they are, to understand when you're doing too much and when you're not doing enough. It's not something where there's going to be a hard, fast rule. I think that's a lot of the problem with a lot of integralists. They're too cognitive, and they have to understand the sensory piece of it too, and the seeing thing as they are piece of it. So it's something you'd have to feel out more so than have a hard, fast rule about. And the thing of it is you can't go into it with fear. Like, you literally have to be okay with being arrested to make any change, because it might come down to that. because the people in charge are going to make what you're doing illegal in some type of a way. So you have to come into the situation knowing that I might get arrested doing this, I might lose my job, and you can't be afraid of that.
What's your take on Joe Biden?
Joe Biden, he said on the House floor they don't want his kids growing up in a racial jungle. So, I don't know what more discussion we need to have after that. I like that he helped out Obama for the years he did, but he was a horrible vice president. Obama couldn't get any legislation through. And the vice president's job is, as vice president, is president of the Senate. So he should be able to push through legislation, or at least let the president know what is possible to be passed. And Obama had the hardest time getting legislation through. So, I kind of feel like we're just out here on our own now. And that's why I say there is no real leaders at the level we need for what we're about to come up against. I don't think most people really understand how bad it's going to get. Most small businesses have like a week or two of cash on hand. They don't have 3 months of cash on hand. When we finally open back up, your favorite restaurant's probably not going to exist. And the place you like to go get a beer that's a hole in the wall spot, it's probably not going to be there. And I don't think people have really understand what we're up against now and how really good leadership is needed. But we haven't cultivated good leadership this whole time. So now here we're at, and we don't have, and we're scrambling. And so, I don't really know what to do. I'm not going to endorse anybody. I'm not going to, I'm going to let people vote for who they want to vote for. I'm not going to vote or shame anybody. You could say Biden is better than Trump, if you want to. But, I don't think there's anybody really ready to take the reins for what we're about to be up against, how bad it's about to be. So,
who do you think's more dangerous? Like a conservative corporatist establishment that brings a lot of this racism in and in the short term is very damaging and does a lot of corporate giveaways, or democratic corporatists, liberals, who manage the system a little better, but over the long term might be the ones setting up the conditions leading to the collapse and disguising it with a sort of woke signaling.
Well, see, that's the exact kind of conversation we have at BLA all the time. Would you rather Trump just say racial slurs, or would you rather have Clinton come in? If you read Nathan Robinson's book on this, what Clinton did in Georgia before he ran, he met at all the local NAACP branches and let them know, oh, I love you guys and all that. And at the end of it, he did a speech at Forsyth County, Georgia. If you look up Clinton, it's a photograph of Clinton in front of all these prisoners, black prisoners. And he announced his tough on crime legislation. And that was a predecessor to the prison industrial complex we have now. So you're asking, would it have just been better for him to be just openly racist and we know? Or would you rather it be 30 years from now and then we read Nathan Robinson's book and we're like, oh crap, that was going on? I didn't know. No one told me that was going on. That was at the NAACP meetings. So, I don't know, man. Like I said, I think the most important thing for any integralist is to see it more as beyond Biden or Trump or Bernie and Trump or whoever. You have to understand these different ways of progression and these different value-centered movements that are forming. So Trump isn't just Trump. Trump is the Tea Party, and the Tea Party is a progression. And the Tea Party is a progression of the White Citizens Council from the Civil Rights Movement. So you have to understand that progression to stop it. And just railing on Trump, well, if they replace Trump with Mike Pompeo, then what are you going to do? That could happen. And what if they replace Biden with somebody just as bad or, just as empty? Then what? What if next election is Pompeo versus Pete Buttigieg? Then what do you do? So, I think we really got to start a movement and facilitate leaders that are integralist and understand these progressions and get leaders up on through the sales, starting at the local level at your city council, at your governor's house. I think that's what we need to be doing, trying to build up our own leaders, and not just guys on the internet, armchair philosophy, guys who really know civics, guys who really know protesting. And I think that's what we need to be focusing on, and not just Trump or Biden or Bernie.
You've clearly got a good sense of historical Black leadership, philosophically and civically well informed. What's your sense of Black leadership in fiction? Are there any characters that you could point to and you think that's a pretty good example of something I'm talking about?
See, I don't actually even read that much fiction. I literally read history all the time. I mean, there's one show that I watch, King of Harlem. I haven't watched it in a couple months, but it talks about Bumpy Johnson. It's not exactly historical accurate, but it's really interesting. So Bumpy Johnson was a mobster in Harlem back in the day. And it was the same time as Malcolm X was in charge of Mosque Number 7, and also Adam Clayton Powell was in Congress. So it's funny watching this interaction between a mobster who's helping to finance the only Black congressman at the time, and he's interacting with Malcolm X, who's trying to stop drug dealing. So that interaction is really, really good, and that's an epic show. It's called Godfather of Harlem. That's what it's called, Godfather of Harlem. I haven't watched it in a long time. I like that show a lot. But honestly, that's about the only show I watch other than the news. And that dynamic is really, really, really interesting. You know, Adam Clayton Powell to me was a great leader. I work for Congress now, and the lunchroom I eat at was desegregated by Adam Clayton Powell. When he got into Congress, there was a whites only sign at the Dirksen cafeteria. And he knew that if he can't eat in the cafeteria, he can't get the legislation he needs passed because he has to interact with people. So his first day there, he got two of the biggest guys on the maintenance team to eat lunch with them in the whites only section. And they were so big that everybody was scared to tell them to leave. So they took down the whites only sign. And that's leadership. It's not just, coming up with some big, great thesis or anything like that. It's actually understanding right now what you can do to make a situation better on the level you're operating on right now. And I think that's something people miss a lot of times.
What else should we talk about?
I don't know, man. Like I said, man, I love integralist and talking about integral stuff, man. And so, this was great. I love your work, and like you said, we got to just keep fighting, man. We just got to keep building the group up.
What would you ask the next person I talk to in this series? Somebody who's coming forth online, trying to bring these ideas in a new way with a new aesthetic in some way that's going to change the world or something like that. What should I ask them? What are your most important identities, and how do they interact with each other? Because everybody has multiple identities. You're an integralist, you're a Buddhist, you're a member of your family, you're a Tennessean. All that stuff goes together. And the way you can make all those saliencies, that's what Dr. Cross uses. He says the saliencies. If you can make all those different saliencies fit together, that's what makes you psychologically healthy. And that's what makes you a benefit to other people. Fabulous. All right. Thanks very much, David. This has been great. I'll see you soon, okay? You too, man. You too, man. Bye.